Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I want to give a few remarks today on postures in meditation. It's a very basic but very integral part of the meditation practice is how one holds the body. First point to make is that really you can meditate in any posture. But there are 4 traditional postures for meditation: sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. The sitting posture is what I think most people would most readily associate with meditation, but it's only one of the 4. The sitting posture has a number of variants. The strongest, stablest form is sitting full lotus, but on the floor, on a cushion. But that's difficult for many people, so there are a number of other options. Sitting what's called half lotus, which is one foot, usually the right foot, resting on the opposite thigh and the other foot on the floor underneath. Quarter lotus is sitting with one foot on the floor and the other foot resting on the calf. Then there's what's called the easy posture, which is both legs on the floor. The legs aren't really crossed at all. Or you can sit on a sitting bench. This is a Burmese invention. Or there's the posture the Thais call puppy up, which is both feet pointing backwards. So one leg is kind of twisted around behind. Or one can sit in a chair, which for people who have difficulty sitting on the floor, a chair is quite acceptable. If you're going to sit on a chair, you should try and keep the back straight. So the ideal is a straight back chair, not a kind of comfy armchair type thing. And if you put something like a rolled up towel or a hard cushion to support the lower back, just above the hips, so that the lower back is supported but the shoulders are free, that's ideal. Now, that's a lot of different options for sitting, but what's really important in any posture of sitting is that one keeps the back upright and not give in to slouching, which causes drowsiness. And also, if you're sitting with your back bent for a long period of time, then you actually have more difficulty, more pain in the back caused by that. It stresses the back over time. Keeping the back upright doesn't mean rigid. It actually makes a kind of gentle S-curve. One way of practice of finding that, a good position for the back is to begin by stretching a little bit upwards. Just imagine like there's a cord or a rope attached to your skull pulling you upright, and then relax down into it. The Visuddhimagga talks about visualizing the spine as like a pile of coins, the vertebrae, so that if the weight is supporting properly, the whole thing will stand perpendicular on its own. But if it's leaning one way or the other, it'll topple. So you want a good straight back, and you can find that you may have to adjust your seat, how higher or lower cushion, to find that push your hips in at the right angle so one can keep the back straight. And there are a couple of yoga moves that help with sitting. If you have difficulty sitting, the reason we often find difficulty is because our hips aren't open. We feel it in the knees, but it's because the hips aren't open. In cultures like India and Thailand, where they traditionally sit on the floor, they don't have any problem, any issue with it. But Westerners and also Chinese who sit in chairs, doing that from an early age, that spoils the flexibility of your hips. Your hips become too tight, and you need to open your hips. So the best yoga exercise for opening the hips is what's called the Cobbler's pose, which is you sit flat on the floor, no cushion, and put the soles of the feet together and draw the heels as close to the body as you can, and stretch the legs, the knees, down towards the floor. So the perfect posture is, and with the whole leg, both legs resting on the floor and the feet together and the heels right up in against the body. And that's a very good stretch. And for the guys, the Hatha Yoga people say that if you do that exercise regularly, you'll never get prostate trouble. If you are going to do that exercise, caution is not to bounce the legs down or push them down with the arms. You don't want to overstretch. You just stretch them gently until you feel the stretch, but it shouldn't be painful. But you feel a stretch, and you can hold that for quite a long time. You can even meditate in that posture if you like. Another one that's good for the knees and ankles is the seated hero pose, which is kneeling with the legs apart, and you settle the bum down onto the floor between the feet. And you may not be able to stretch all the way to the floor at first, and you can use a cushion, but the object is to try and get down to the floor. And if you're doing that pose, one thing that's quite important is make sure your shins are parallel. They're not splayed outwards or inwards. They're parallel to each other. If you get really good at that pose and you're able to sit without any effort on the floor in between your legs, then the next stage is to lean and lay back. And if you're doing a lot of sitting, you're on a retreat, or you're just doing a lot of sitting and you're feeling crampy in the legs, once a day or so to do a upside down pose, shoulder stand or headstand, and stretch the feet upwards to get the circulation back. And a good tip for that, if you're doing, say, a shoulder stand, and really stretch the legs upwards, but point the balls of the feet at the ceiling, not the toes. You get the correct stretch if you relax the toes and point the balls of the feet at the ceiling. So those are a few moves that are very helpful for more comfortable sitting. Then there's the question of the hands. The traditional meditation mudra in Theravada Buddhism is the left hand resting in the lap and the right hand resting in the left hand. The one thing that is said you should really try and avoid is don't interlock the fingers. That becomes too distracting. It's too busy. A small variation on that is if you lift the thumbs and touch the tips of the thumbs together, that can help with wakefulness, because if you're holding your hands in that mudra, it does require a small amount of muscular effort, and if you get sleepy, the thumbs will fall apart, and you can notice that immediately. And the question sometimes arises if you're experiencing stress or difficulty in the body sitting, whether it's better to move or to endure the sensation. And I don't think there's a really hard and fast rule for that. It's better if you can just sit still. Any kind of moving around unnecessarily is going to be very disruptive to the meditation. But on the other hand, if you're experiencing a great deal of pain in the body and you know you can ease it by just changing the way your legs are crossed, for example, then it would be kind of foolish not to do that. You have to kind of find a middle path, not to be fussing around with every little discomfort, but not to be unnecessarily enduring prolonged suffering. Related to that is the sensations and pain in the body, is the issue of pain in the knees. I think as a general rule, you should be kind of careful with the knees. They're delicate joints. Pains in the back or elsewhere can be endured without causing any damage. But if you have pains, particularly sharp pains in the knees, you might be doing something wrong and you need to be careful. In my time, I've known two individuals, one was a monk and one was a laywoman, who had to get surgery on their knees because they were sitting full lotus and it hurt, and they just ignored it, thought they'll just bear through it, and they ended up tearing something. So you have to be a little bit careful with the knees, unless you've got some serious issue like slipped discs or something. That you can be tougher with the back. You're not going to damage anything by enduring through discomfort in the back, which is very often purely mentally induced anyway. Almost everybody experiences, particularly when they begin, they experience pain in the body in meditation, and that's an issue for a lot of people for a long time. And yeah, you can do things like those yoga poses, and you can try and adjust your seat and your posture to try and alleviate the pain, but that only goes so far. In the end, you get past the issue of pain in the body not by getting rid of the pain, but by no longer letting it matter. Because the reality is, as long as you're in a human form, there's going to be some pain in the body. That's an inherent dukkha to the human body. And it said of the three characteristics, each one has a characteristic way of masking itself, so it's not evident to the untrained mind. And the other two are kind of philosophical. The way emptiness hides itself is by the illusion of compactness, meaning tending to see things as discrete objects. And the characteristic of impermanence hides itself by the illusion of continuity, because subsequent moments resemble each other, there appears to be a persistence in time. But the quality of dukkha masks itself in a very down-to-earth way is by change of postures, meaning we fidget out of it. So if you sit still, and very often when people take up meditation, it's the first time they've sat absolutely still while they're wide awake for longer than 5 minutes. And the dukkha in the body becomes evident. It's always present, but normally if you're sitting in your comfy chair at home watching TV or reading a book or something, you're constantly fidgeting a little bit, changing your weight, moving your legs, to change the balance. Because as soon as the dukkha becomes evident, you shift, and then it sets up a new constellation which isn't evident at first. Change is good as a rest, and you never really look at the dukkha. But if you're sitting still in meditation, it becomes evident, and if you don't let yourself fidget out of it, it becomes clear. And at first it can be experienced as pain and distress. The second most common posture for meditation, and one that's done quite a bit in the Thai forest tradition, is a walking posture. We sometimes talk about walking meditation. That's kind of a loose terminology because it's not really a meditation. It's a posture in which you can meditate in. And you can do just about any meditation that you can do sitting, you can do walking. It's not a specific practice in itself. It's just a posture to meditate in. And the traditional way to do walking meditation is to walk back and forth on a path. You can do it indoors or outdoors. And if possible, it's best to do it barefoot, so there's sensation in the feet touching the ground or the floor. And the ideal length is about 20 paces, but you work with what you have. Because of the weather, you're forced to meditate indoors, and it's less than that. That's okay. Use what you can, but the ideal is about 20 paces. Longer, you don't want to go too much longer than that. And you walk to the end of the path, and you turn around slowly and mindfully. And a good practice is then to ground yourself again by doing a body sweep from the top of the head down to the feet, and then carry on walking in the other direction. And it's not like going for a stroll. You're in a meditative frame, a meditative posture, so you're not looking around, gazing around, taking in the sights. It said you should hold your gaze ahead at an angle, so you don't stumble on roots or whatever, but you're looking ahead on the ground as if you were guiding a plow. It's an agricultural reference. You imagine you've got an ox or a donkey or something pulling a plow. When you're standing behind guiding it, you're looking at the blade of the plow. The hands should be in front. This is something they emphasize in Thai forest, actually, not to clasp your hands behind your back. That said that means you're going for a stroll. You're having if you're meditating, you have your hands in front. And then you can use the same mudra as when sitting. The pace of the walk, there's no hard and fast rule for that, and it depends some degree on what meditation you're doing and what tradition you're following. Generally in the Thai forest tradition, they tend to walk at a slightly slower than normal pace. If you're doing Mahasi style Vipassana, you walk very slowly, and you use a little bit of an unnatural gait because you make a point of only moving one foot at a time. You don't start lifting up the second foot until the first one is firmly planted. Whereas if you observe yourself walking normally, the heel of the right foot, say, will be not quite planted before you lift the heel of the left foot. They're both in action at the same time. But you want to concentrate on one object at a time in that Vipassana meditation. So you try and walk in that way. You can use the pace of the walk to adjust your practice. If you're experiencing a great deal of lethargy, it's better to walk more briskly to try and wake yourself up. But if you're in the opposite way and you're experiencing a lot of restlessness, it's better to walk very slowly and try and restrain the state of mind. In any case, if the mind gets very busy and wandering when you are walking, you can stop and meditate standing until the mind quiets down. Walking meditation, it's not just a rest for the body, changing posture. It has benefits of its own in that it is naturally somewhat more challenging because there's more going on. You've got more sensory input. But because of this, the Buddha said that samadhi gained while walking is very strong, lasts a long time. So something that can be very conducive is if you've got a period of time to meditate, to start with a walk, even if it's a short one, and then go into a sit after the walk. So moving from the more vigorous to the more restrained posture. And then you'll find the sit will be much stronger. But what's important for this is that the transition from walking to sitting is very important, that you do that mindfully and smoothly without an abrupt break. So it's recommended if you're meditating for an extended period of time and you're alternating sitting and walking, if you've got any small things you need to do to take care of business, like have a glass of water or have a pee or feed the fire, something like that, to try and do that at the beginning part of the walking period, get it out of the way so you don't disrupt the latter part of the walking, so you can just go smoothly into the sitting without discontinuity. That actually helps a lot. That's quite important. One other point about walking, it's a little bit of an oddity, but I'll mention it for what it's worth, is that in the Ajahn Mun and then Ajahn Mahabua tradition, they always set up their walking paths running north-south. And as far as I know, that's the only tradition that makes a distinction that way. They try and set their paths as close to north-south as possible, given terrain and other factors, and try to avoid an east-west path. There's been different speculation about why that should be so. Neither Ajahn Mun nor Ajahn Mahabua, as far as I know, in any of their surviving literature explains why. Some people think it's to do with it, you don't get the sun in your eyes, but that would only be at certain times of the day, and generally in Thailand, particularly in the old days, you were in the forest, so it wouldn't be such an issue anyway. I've had the idea, and I'll just throw this out as a speculation that I don't know for sure this is so, but I'm wondering if Ajahn Mun and his advanced follower Ajahn Mahabua were so sensitive that without necessarily knowing what it was, they felt a disturbance walking east-west because they were crossing the magnetic field lines of the Earth. So it would kind of upset their system a little bit. But you wouldn't get that same disruption walking north-south with the field lines. I'm going to emphasize again, that's purely speculative on my part. Standing meditation is less often done, but it's actually very good alternate for either walking or sitting. I've already mentioned that when you're walking and the mind gets very busy, just stop and stand and continue meditating until the mind quiets. But it's also a good alternate for sitting. If the body becomes stiff from prolonged sitting, it's quite acceptable and useful to just stand up and meditate standing for a period of time and give the body a break. Standing posture, you would stand with your feet a little apart, basically so that the weight's coming down from the hips to the feet without going sideways. And the hands, again, in front, resting on each other, or alternately just hanging down your side. And to stand in upright, but not rigid like a military at attention kind of pose, but a comfortable, upright posture. The last traditional pose is lying meditation, and that is actually the most difficult posture to meditate in because of the tendency to fall asleep. So there is a traditional position, it's called a lion's pose, which is to lie on your right side with your lower leg more or less straight and the top leg bent at the knee, resting on the other one, and the head propped up on the hand with the elbow resting on the ground, and the other arm laying down the side of the body. Now you'll find if you do that it's very difficult to hold that posture for longer than 10 or 15 minutes without the wrist becoming very uncomfortable. So it's not a posture that generally most people can hold for long, but it does prevent you from falling asleep. And if you don't use the elbow forearm to prop yourself up, but you lay on your side, resting your head on your hand, that's more relaxed, but then it has the danger if you're falling asleep. Now this posture can be used in the more relaxed form. It can be used if you want to carry on the meditation into the sleep states. That is the recommended posture for going to sleep mindfully. It's an interesting practice to try to make a resolution to notice the last breath falling asleep and the first breath waking up, and to try and meditate into the sleep state. You have to be gentle with the meditation or you won't fall asleep. If you want to fall asleep, you're trying to fall asleep. You don't want to focus too hard on the object, but let the mind relax, but kind of try and keep the theme going of being aware of the breath as you drift into sleep. And then generally people who try this, they find it easier, and it happens first, that they'll notice the first breath waking up. And that in itself is interesting because it's waking up as completely and as suddenly as turning on a light switch. It's no slow, dozy climbing out of the fog of semi-consciousness. It's like bang, zap, you're awake, you're on. You know, that's that in itself is valuable. But it's really interesting if you can catch the last breath falling asleep, because then you walk across the threshold from a waking state into the dream state consciously, and you're immediately into a lucid dream, and everything's very clear, and it's obvious that you're it's obvious to you that you're dreaming, that you're asleep and you're dreaming. That's trickier to do, and it's also when it first happens, it may be so kind of unusual that you wake up right away. You're sort of shocked into wakefulness, but it is possible to do. And in any case, the further you can get along watching yourself fall asleep is a useful and interesting experiment, because the stages of falling asleep mirror exactly the stages of dying. So it's like a rehearsal for dying. Your faculties fall away in the same order, like rational thought and the external senses and so on. They fall away in the same order as when you're dying. There was one passage in Gudra somewhere that talks about the different postures of sleeping, and it said that sensual person sleeps on their left side, a Buddha sleeps on his right side. Sleeping on your back is ghost consciousness, Peta consciousness, and sleeping on your belly is animal consciousness. So those are the four postures and how we use them and what they're appropriate for. In terms of how important correct posture is certainly helpful, generally better, but I think as a general rule it's not the most critical factor. As long as you're not slouching, you're keeping your back upright, however you hold the body comfortably, and it's going to differ for individuals and it'll differ for the same person from time to time. However you can sit without fidgeting, sitting solidly, that's conducive to meditation. There are traditions that put a lot of emphasis on posture. Some of the Zen people are like that. They have a practice of just sitting, they call it. I always remember going many years ago when I was a layperson. I went to a lecture by a Zen master about meditation, and I was eager to hear about meditation. And he spoke for over an hour, and all he spoke about was posture. There was no mention of what you're supposed to do with your mind. I kept waiting for it. I thought the talk about posture was preliminary to the, what was going to be the main theme, but it wasn't. That was the main theme. He spoke of every little detail about how you place your legs and feet and your hands and the correct angle for your hips and your neck, and how you even hold your tongue in your mouth, and just every detail. So that becomes then a meditation in itself. And some physical exercises like Hatha Yoga or Qigong, Tai Chi, they can be pure body meditations if they're done with the right spirit. You're just working with the changing postures of the body. So I think I'll stop there.